The vanilla bean paste was a dark constellation in a universe of pale, whipped buttercream. Alara's hands, usually so steady, trembled just enough to make the spatula's final swipe a little less perfect than she liked. It didn't matter. Perfection wasn't the point today. Courage was. She stared at the cake, a simple, elegant affair with 3 layers of buttermilk sponge and a whisper of lavender-infused syrup. It was the note, however, that held all the weight, tucked into a small, crisp envelope beside the confection. Just 3 words, penned in her most careful script. Make a wish, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and exhilarating, reckless hope. For 7 months, he had come into her small bakery, the Gilded Spoon, every Tuesday. Not him, precisely. A man in a sharp suit who never smiled, who would place the exact same order, a box of 12 madeleines and a black coffee, pay in cash, and leave without a word. But Alara knew who the pastries were for. She had seen the sleek black car with tinted windows that the man would climb into, and once, just once, she had seen the silhouette of the man in the back seat. J1. His name was a low hum in the city's undercurrent, a name associated with power, with danger, with a world so far removed from her own that it felt like a different dimension. She knew of him the way everyone did. Whispers of his family's empire, the legitimate businesses that glittered on the surface and the rumored, shadowy dealings that ran deep beneath the city's foundations. He was a man who commanded respect born of fear. And she, a 27-year-old woman who found solace in the precise alchemy of flour and sugar, was about to deliver a birthday cake to him with a note that felt like bearing her soul. It was her grandmother's voice in her head, a phantom echo full of West African warmth and unyielding strength. Fear is a thief, Alara. It steals the life you were meant to live. Her grandmother had taught her to bake, had poured love and legacy into every recipe, a shield against the memories of a fractured home, of a father whose loud words and heavy hands had taught Alara to make herself small, to be invisible. This cake felt like the opposite of invisibility. It felt loud. It felt dangerous. She smoothed down her simple beige dress, her white apron a stark contrast. The bell above the door chimed, and her heart leaped into her throat, but it was only a customer looking for a morning croissant. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the air thick with the scent of yeast and melting butter. She had to do this. For 7 months, the Silent Tuesday ritual had become a strange, one-sided connection. This birthday, which she'd learned of by chance from a stray comment made by his driver, felt like a door creaking open just a crack. She was terrified of what was on the other side, but even more terrified of never finding out. With a final, decisive movement, she picked up the heavy cake box, the small envelope clutched in her other hand. It was just a cake. A simple, sweet offering. But it felt like she was carrying her own heart on a platter, offering it up to a man who could either cherish it or crush it without a second thought. The address led to a discreet, impossibly elegant restaurant in the heart of the city's most exclusive district. It was one of his. The name, Soryu, was etched in minimalist gold lettering on a dark wood door. There were no flashing signs, no ostentatious displays. It exuded a quiet, confident power that was deeply intimidating. Alara stood on the pavement for a full minute, the cake box growing heavier in her arms, her palms slick with nervous sweat. This was a mistake. A terrible, foolish, romanticized mistake. She should turn around, take the cake back to her shop, and eat her feelings in 3 layers of buttermilk sponge. But then she pictured Jaewon's face, a fleeting glimpse she'd caught once when his car window was down. He had been on the phone, his expression severe, but there was a weariness in his eyes that she recognized. It was the look of a person carrying a weight far too heavy for one person to bear. It was a look she knew from her own mirror. Before she could lose her nerve entirely, she pushed the heavy door open. The interior was a symphony of dark wood, low lighting, and hushed voices. A man in a perfectly tailored suit materialized before her, his expression polite but impenetrable. "May I help you?" he asked, his eyes flicking from her face to the large box she was holding. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I have a delivery. For Mr. Kong Jaewon." The man's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, the only sign of his surprise. "He is in a meeting." Do you have a name? Ilara, she said, her voice a little stronger this time. He won't know my name. The man's polite mask didn't slip, but a new current of assessment entered his gaze. He seemed to be cataloging her. The simple dress, the flower smudges on her apron she had forgotten to take off, the nervous energy radiating from her. He gave a slight nod. Please, wait here. He disappeared through a doorway, leaving Ilara standing in the opulent entryway, feeling as out of place as a wildflower in a meticulously curated orchid house. Moments later, the man returned, followed by another figure. It was him, Kong Jae-won. He was taller than she had imagined, his presence filling the space effortlessly. He wore a dark, impeccably cut suit, but he had shed the jacket, and the sleeves of his crisp white shirt were rolled up to his forearms, revealing a glimpse of intricate tattoos. His handsome face was sharp, intelligent, and his dark eyes missed nothing. They landed on her, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink to the space between them. There was no recognition in his gaze, only a calm, unwavering curiosity. He stopped a few feet from her, his posture relaxed but commanding. You have something for me? His voice was deep, smooth, with a quiet authority that sent a shiver down her spine. She simply nodded, unable to find her words, and held out the cake box and the small envelope. He took them from her, his fingers brushing against hers for a fleeting second, a spark of warmth that felt like a jolt of electricity. His gaze dropped to the note, then back to her face. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips. Thank you, he said, the words simple, yet they held a resonance that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a very long time. The scent of lavender and buttermilk was a ghost in Ilara's memory, a sweet phantom that followed her back through the years. She was 10, standing on a small stool in her grandmother's kitchen, a room that always smelled of cinnamon, melting butter, and home. Her grandmother, Nana Adama, was a mountain of a woman with a laugh that could shake the floorboards and hands that were surprisingly gentle as they guided Ilara's own clumsy fingers. That was the year her world had shattered. The year her father's simmering anger had finally boiled over, the shouting becoming a physical storm that left her mother bruised and Ilara hiding, small and silent, in the pantry. After he left, a void of silence and uncertainty filled their small apartment. It was Nana Adama who had marched in, her vibrant Gelly head wrap a banner of defiance, and filled the silence with the rhythmic thump of kneading dough. In this life, little bird, she had said, her voice a low, comforting rumble as she dusted flour over a wooden board. Some people will try to break you. They will use their words, their hands, their anger. They want to make you feel small. But you are not small. She had placed a lump of dough in front of Ilara. You have a fire inside you. You have the strength of all the women who came before you. And you have this, she gestured around the kitchen. This is our magic. We take simple things, flour, sugar, eggs, and we create something that brings joy. Something that nourishes. When the world is loud and cruel, you come here. You make something beautiful. It is how we fight back. That day, they had baked a lemon and lavender cake. Nana Adama explained that the lemon was for cleansing, to cut through the bitterness, and the lavender was for peace, to soothe a troubled heart. As Ilara had measured and mixed, the rhythmic, methodical process had become a meditation. The terror that had been lodged in her chest began to loosen its grip. The kitchen became her sanctuary, baking her prayer. Over the years, that lesson had become her guiding principle. She had poured all her passion, her grief, and her hope into her craft. The Gilded Spoon was more than a business. It was a testament to her survival, a fortress built of sugar and butter. It was her way of fighting back, of creating beauty in a world that had shown her its ugliness. Standing before Jae-won, a man who radiated a different kind of power, a dangerous power that was so unlike her father's brutish anger, she felt that old, familiar fear. But mingled with it was Nana Adama's voice, urging her to be brave. This cake was not just a cake. It was a message. It was her taking flour, sugar, and eggs and creating a moment of connection, an offering of peace. It was her magic, her way of telling a man who seemed to have everything that she saw the weariness in his eyes, and she was offering him a moment of simple, uncomplicated joy. She was offering him a wish. Jaewon watched the baker, Alara, retreat through the heavy wooden door of his restaurant, her movements quick and shy, like a startled fawn. He stood for a moment in the quiet opulence of the entryway, the pristine white cake box in one hand and the small, crisp envelope in the other. His head of security, Mr. Park, a man who had been with his family for decades and whose face was a permanent mask of stoic professionalism, stood silently nearby. "Sir?" Park's voice was low, questioning. Jaewon didn't answer immediately. He ran his thumb over the simple, elegant script on the envelope. No name, no company logo, just his name. He slid his finger under the flap and pulled out a small, cream-colored card. On it were 3 words. Make a wish. He stared at the words, a slow smile finally breaking across his features, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and momentarily erased the weary tension that so often resided there. It was audacious. It was unexpected. And it was, in a strange way, incredibly insightful. People gave him things all the time, expensive watches, rare bottles of scotch, fawning compliments. They were offerings of fear, of respect, of people wanting something from him. No one had ever given him something so simple, so pure as a wish. He looked at Park. Find out everything about her, it wasn't a question. Park nodded, his expression unchanging, but Jaewon knew the order would be executed with swift, silent efficiency. By evening, he would know her name, her address, the name of her bakery, what kind of flour she preferred, and probably her favorite color. He walked back towards his private dining room, waving off his waiting associates. He needed a moment. He set the box down on the large mahogany table, the stark white a contrast to the dark, masculine room. He opened it carefully. The cake was beautiful, its buttercream frosting flawlessly smooth, its scent a delicate, calming blend of vanilla and something floral he couldn't quite place. It wasn't ostentatious. It was understated, elegant, and clearly made with incredible skill. It was a reflection of the woman who had delivered it. He thought of her, the dusting of flour on her apron, the nervous tremor in her hands, and the surprising steel in her eyes when she had met his gaze. There was a quiet strength about her, a vulnerability that was not weakness but a kind of fierce, protected softness. For 7 months, his driver had been bringing him her madeleines. He had become addicted to them, to the perfect, shell-like shape and the delicate, buttery crumb. It had become his small, secret ritual, a moment of uncomplicated pleasure in a life filled with complexities and obligations. He had known, of course, that his driver was not the one baking them. He had pictured a grandmotherly figure, someone with kind, wrinkled hands. The reality of Alara was far more intriguing. He picked up the card again. Make a wish. Jaewon looked at the cake, then out the window at the sprawling city that was his kingdom and his cage. What did a man like him wish for? He had wealth, power, respect. But he was surrounded by people who wanted a piece of that power, who saw him not as a man, but as a means to an end. He felt a sudden, sharp longing for something real, something genuine, something as simple and as beautiful as this cake. His wish formed in his mind, clear and undeniable. He picked up his phone and dialed his driver. The bakery, he said, his voice decisive. The one you go to on Tuesdays. I want its name and address. Now. The bell above the door of the Gilded Spoon chimed, a cheerful, familiar sound that usually brought a smile to Alara's face. Today, it made her jump, and a cloud of powdered sugar poofed up from the croissant she was dusting. Her nerves had been shot since her reckless delivery that morning. She had spent the entire day in a state of suspended animation, half expecting a visit from grim-faced men in suits and the other half scolding herself for her foolish, romantic fantasy. When she looked up, her heart didn't just jump, it seemed to stop altogether. Standing in the doorway, looking impossibly out of place, and yet completely at ease in her small, flower-dusted sanctuary, was Kong Jaewon. He was dressed more casually now, in dark trousers and a soft, gray cashmere sweater that made him look less like a feared business magnate and more like a man you'd see in a coffee shop. But the aura of quiet, confident power was still there, an invisible current that seemed to charge the air around him. He took in the cozy space, the display case filled with glistening tarts and flaky pastries, the warm scent of baking bread, the soft jazz music playing from a small speaker. His eyes finally landed on her, and the ghost of that smile she had seen earlier returned. "Elara," he said. Her name on his lips sounded both foreign and incredibly right. She could only stare, her hand still frozen midair over the tray of croissants. He took a few steps further into the shop, his gaze sweeping over the confections in the glass case. "I never knew who was responsible for my Tuesday madeleines." His voice was a low, pleasant rumble. "They are the best I have ever had." Elara finally found her voice, though it was little more than a squeak. "Thank you." He stopped in front of the counter, leaning against it slightly, a gesture that was both relaxed and possessive. He reached into his pocket and placed the small, cream-colored card on the counter, sliding it gently towards her. Her note. "Make a wish." Her breath hitched. This was it. The moment of reckoning. He was going to politely decline, or worse, warn her to never be so bold again. He leaned in a little closer, his dark eyes holding hers, and the rest of the world seemed to melt away. There was only the scent of sugar and his subtle, clean cologne, the soft music, and the intense, unnerving focus of his gaze. "I came to give you my answer," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a confidential, intimate tone that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. He tapped a single, long finger on the card. His eyes never left hers as he delivered his reply, a single word that shattered her carefully constructed walls of fear and blew open the door to a future she had never dared to imagine. "You." The single word hung in the air between them, a tangible thing that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics in her small shop. "You." It wasn't a proposition or a pickup line. It was a declaration, quiet and absolute. Elara felt the blush start at her neck and creep up to the roots of her hair, a wildfire of disbelief and sheer, terrifying delight. Her mind, usually a calm and orderly place of recipes and measurements, was a chaotic storm. This was Kong Jae-won, a man whose name was spoken in hushed tones, a man who moved in circles of power and danger she could barely comprehend. And he was standing in her bakery, in front of a tray of cooling croissants, claiming her as a wish. She finally managed to close her mouth, her lips feeling dry. "Me?" The word was a breath, a question mark on the air. Jae-won's smile deepened, crinkling the corners of his intense eyes. You bake things that feel like peace. You walk into a room full of sharks and offer a wish instead of a plea. And you look at me not like I'm Kong Jae-won, but like I'm just a man who might be tired." He gestured around the shop. "This place, it is the opposite of my world. I find that I want to spend more time in it." His directness was disarming, cutting through her layers of shyness and fear. He wasn't playing games. He was stating facts as he saw them. It was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. An idea, as bold and reckless as delivering the cake, began to form in her mind. "My world has rules," she said, her voice steadier now, finding its footing. "In my world, you don't just get what you wish for. You have to earn it." A flicker of surprise, then deep appreciation, crossed his face. He nodded slowly. "Then teach me the rules," and so it began. Not with fancy dinners or extravagant dates, but in the quiet, flower-dusted hours after the Gilded Spoon had closed for the day. He would arrive, shedding his expensive suit jacket and the weight of his day, and she would tie a spare apron around his waist. Their first lesson was macarons. She showed him how to fold the almond flour and meringue with a gentle, patient hand, explaining the importance of macaronage until the batter flowed like lava. He was a surprisingly good student, focused, precise, and attentive. His large, capable hands, which she could easily imagine signing ruthless contracts or making formidable gestures, were surprisingly deft as he piped perfect little circles onto the baking sheet. In these moments, he wasn't the formidable tycoon. He was just Jae-won, a man learning the delicate art of creating something sweet and fragile. They talked as they worked, their conversations weaving between the racks of cooling pastries. She told him about Nana Adama and the magic of baking, and he told her about his own grandfather, a man who had built their empire from nothing but believed that true strength was in quiet observation. He never spoke directly of the darker side of his business, but he spoke of duty, of legacy, and of the crushing weight of expectation. In the warmth of the bakery, surrounded by the comforting scent of vanilla and caramelizing sugar, they found a common language, a shared space where their two disparate worlds could meet and, for a few hours, become one. Their quiet, flour-dusted routine continued for several weeks, a secret world they built for themselves after dark. The space between them, once charged with nervous tension, was now filled with a comfortable, simmering intimacy. One evening, as they were boxing up a batch of financiers they had made, Jaewon's hand brushed against hers, and this time, he didn't pull away. He laced his fingers through hers, his thumb gently stroking her palm. "Elara," he said, his voice low and serious. "I want to take you out, away from here." A proper date, panic, cold and familiar, fluttered in her chest. Outside the sanctuary of her bakery, the differences between them would be stark and unavoidable. She was a baker. He was practically royalty. But looking into his patient, steady gaze, she knew she couldn't hide in her sanctuary forever. It was Nana Adama who made the decision for her. She had been watching Elara for weeks, her wise old eyes missing nothing, the perpetual soft smile on her granddaughter's face, the way she seemed to float rather than walk. One evening, as Elara was getting home, her grandmother was waiting for her at the kitchen table, a formidable presence with a steaming mug of tea. "So," Nana Adama began, without any preamble, "who is this man who has put the stars back in your eyes?" Elara, caught off guard, stammered, trying to be vague, but her grandmother would have none of it. She patted the chair beside her. "Seat. Tell me everything." "A woman does not glow like a firefly for no reason," Elara confessed, the story of the cake, the note, and the after-hours baking lessons tumbling out of her. She mentioned his name was Jaewon, that he was a successful businessman. Nana Adama listened intently, her expression unreadable. "A businessman," she repeated, her tone skeptical. "What kind of business?" Elara hesitated. "His family is very influential." Nana Adama's eyes narrowed. "I see. Influential." She was silent for a long moment, and Elara's heart sank. Then, her grandmother slapped her hand on the table, making the teacups rattle. "Good. A man should have ambition. But if he wants to court my granddaughter, he does not hide her away in a kitchen at night. He comes to my house. He eats my food. He looks me in the eye and shows me his intentions are honorable. You will invite this Kong Jaewon to dinner." Saturday, there was no arguing with that tone. And so, on Saturday evening, Jaewon stood at the door of Elara's small, humble apartment, holding not flowers or wine, but a beautifully wrapped box containing the rarest, most fragrant ginseng root, a traditional gift of utmost respect. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored shirt and trousers, but his presence still seemed to fill the entire hallway. The dinner was an interrogation disguised as a meal. Nana Adama served a rich, spicy jollof rice with fried plantains and grilled fish, watching Jaewon's every move. She asked him about his family, his values, his future, her questions blunt and direct. Elara sat in mortified silence, but Jaewon was completely unfazed. He answered each question with calm sincerity, his respect for the matriarch in front of him evident in every word. He ate with genuine enjoyment, praising the food and asking for the recipe, which earned him a rare, booming laugh from Nana Adama. By the end of the night, as they sat with cups of mint tea, Nana Adama looked from Jaewon to Elara, a soft, knowing look on her face. As he was leaving, she pulled him aside. "You have old eyes, boy," she said, her voice a low rumble. "You have seen trouble. But his heart is not troubled when he looks at you," she later told Elara, giving her granddaughter's hand a firm squeeze. "That one. He is a protector. You be good to him." Cautious, wise approval had been granted. Having passed the trial by jollof rice, it was now Jaewon's turn to bridge their worlds. The invitation came a week later, delivered on thick, cream-colored cardstock with a Kong family crest embossed in gold. A formal Sunday dinner at his family's estate. Alara's stomach twisted into a knot of pure terror. Nana Adama's apartment was her home ground. The calm estate felt like stepping onto another planet. As they drove through the imposing iron gates and up a long, winding driveway flanked by perfectly manicured gardens, she felt smaller and smaller. The house wasn't a house. It was a modern palace, a breathtaking structure of glass, steel, and dark wood that seemed to merge with the surrounding hillside, overlooking the glittering city below. Jae-won squeezed her hand, sensing her anxiety. "Just be yourself," he whispered. "That's the woman I want them to meet." His family was assembled in a large, minimalist living room with a wall of glass that framed the city, like a living work of art. The undisputed center of gravity in the room was a small, elegant woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and eyes as sharp and intelligent as Jae-won's. This was his grandmother, Kang Min-hee, the true matriarch of the family. Her welcome was polite but cool, her gaze sweeping over Alara in a swift, comprehensive assessment that missed nothing, from her simple but elegant dress to the nervous way she clutched her handbag. The dinner was a masterclass in quiet tension. The table was set with exquisite porcelain, and a dozen small, intricate dishes were served with choreographed precision. The conversation was polite, revolving around art, finance, and other topics Alara felt hopelessly unqualified to comment on. Jae-won's grandmother directed a few pointed questions at Alara, her tone deceptively gentle. "Alara SSI," she said, using the formal suffix. "Jae-won tells us you are a baker. Charming profession. Tell me, what did your father do?" Alara's breath caught in her throat. She thought of her father's rage, of the shame and fear that had defined her childhood. She met the old woman's gaze, her back straightening with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "He taught me the importance of kindness, harmony," she said, using the respectful term for grandmother. "He taught me that a man's true strength is measured not by his power, but by his gentleness." A flicker of surprise crossed the matriarch's face. Later, for dessert, Alara presented the gift she had brought, her hands trembling slightly as she unwrapped it. It was a cake, but one she had spent days perfecting. It was a delicate rice flour sponge, subtly sweetened with honey and infused with saffron, a spice from Nana Adama's own kitchen. It was served with a ginger pear compote. It was a fusion, a conversation between two cultures on a plate. She had taken something familiar and beloved in Korean cuisine and woven in a thread of her own heritage. Jae-won's grandmother took a small, delicate bite. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the flavor. She said nothing, but when she looked at Alara again, the ice in her eyes had begun to thaw, replaced by a glimmer of grudging respect. Alara hadn't just brought a dessert. She had brought an offering of understanding. She hadn't tried to erase the distance between their worlds, but to build a bridge. A year bled into two, and the bridge between their worlds became a well-trodden path. Alara's life was now a beautiful tapestry woven with the vibrant threads of Nana Adama's kitchen and the elegant, quiet strength of the Kang family traditions. The gilded spoon flourished, its reputation growing, but her favorite time was still after hours, when Jae-won would come and they would simply exist together in the warm, sweet-smelling space. The proposal happened on a rainy Tuesday night, exactly 3 years to the day he had first walked into her shop. The bakery was dark except for the soft glow of the fairy lights she kept strung up year-round. He didn't come with a grand speech or a public spectacle. He just stood in the middle of the room, the place where it had all begun, and looked at her with an expression of such profound love that it made her ache. "My whole life has been about duty, about building and protecting an empire," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought about what I wanted for myself. Not until you walked into my restaurant with a cake and a wish." He slowly went down on one knee on the flour-dusted floor, pulling out a small velvet box. "You are my peace, Alara. You are the only thing I have ever truly wished for." The ring was simple, elegant, a single, perfect diamond that shone like a captured star. Through her tears, she said yes. Their happiness felt boundless, a perfect, shimmering bubble. A few weeks later, the bubble was pricked. They were leaving a quiet restaurant late one evening when 2 black sedans silently boxed their car in. Alara's heart seized with terror. Jae-won's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The warm, patient man she loved was gone, replaced by a figure of ice and steel. He pushed her gently but firmly behind him, his body a shield. Men in dark suits emerged from the other cars. Their leader, a man with a cruel sneer, stepped forward. Words were exchanged in Korean, low and guttural, the tone sharp and menacing. Alara couldn't understand the words, but she understood the threat. She saw the other man's eyes flick to her, a predatory gleam in them. In that moment, Jaewon moved. It wasn't a brawl, it was a display of chilling, precise authority. He spoke one final, quiet sentence, and the atmosphere changed. The other man's sneer vanished, replaced by a look of shock, and then unmistakable fear. He and his men bowed stiffly and retreated to their cars, melting back into the night as quickly as they had appeared. In the car on the way home, the silence was deafening. Alara was trembling, not from fear of Jaewon, but from the raw, terrifying glimpse she'd had into the world he navigated. He finally spoke, his voice heavy. "This is my world, Alara. This is the part one have tried to keep from you. If you want to walk away, I will understand. I will not hold you to your promise." A flashback, sharp and painful, hit her. Her father, his face red with uncontrolled rage, his power a destructive, chaotic force that broke things. She looked at Jaewon, at his hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. The power she had just witnessed was the opposite. It was controlled, contained, a fortress meant to protect, not to destroy. She reached over and placed her hand over his. "You told me once that I bake things that feel like peace," she said softly. "But you, Jaewon, you are my peace. All of you." 5 years later, the kitchen in Alara and Jaewon's home was filled with light, laughter, and the rich scent of melting chocolate. It was a spacious, beautiful room, a blend of sleek Korean minimalism and the warm, vibrant colors of West African textiles. At the center of it all, a small, 4-year-old girl with her mother's wide, curious eyes and her father's determined chin stood on a stool, diligently stirring a bowl of brownie batter. Alara stood beside her, guiding her small hands, her heart swelling with a love so immense it felt as if it might spill over. "That's it, little bird," she murmured, using the name Nana Adama had always called her. The bell at the front door chimed, and a moment later, 2 formidable figures entered the kitchen, a study in contrasting elegance. Nana Adama, wrapped in a spectacular blue and gold geli, and Kang Min-hee in a perfectly tailored silk hanbok. They were the 2 poles of their family, the anchors of tradition, and over the years, they had forged an unlikely, deeply affectionate friendship built on a shared, fierce love for their granddaughter and great-granddaughter. "Halmoni, Nana," the little girl cried, abandoning her bowl to hug their knees. A lively, multilingual argument immediately began over who would get the first hug, their bickering a familiar and beloved soundtrack to their family gatherings. Jaewon arrived home minutes later, his tailored suit shed for a soft sweater. The tired lines around his eyes, once a permanent fixture, now only appeared after a long day, and they vanished the moment he saw his daughter running into his arms. He came and wrapped his arms around Alara from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they watched their family. He looked from the 2 bickering grandmothers to his daughter, now showing Halmoni her chocolate-covered fingers with immense pride. "Look at what you've created," he whispered into Alara's ear. This chaos, this love. Later that evening, after their daughter was asleep and the grandmothers had departed with promises to return for Sunday dinner, Alara and Jaewon sat on their balcony overlooking the city lights. The Gilded Spoon was now a small chain, managed by a team she trusted, allowing her to be here, in this moment. She thought back to the shy, fearful woman she had been, a woman who had poured all of her courage into a single cake and a 3-word note. She had offered a man who had everything a simple wish. He had looked at her and replied, "You." In doing so, he had taken her own unvoiced wish for a life free from fear, a life filled with a love that felt like a sanctuary, and made it their shared reality. It was a legacy not of power or of money, but of courage, of 2 worlds building a bridge, and of the simple, extraordinary magic that can be found in flour, sugar, and a heart brave enough to take a risk.